Sometimes the wrong door is the only one destiny was ever waiting for you to knock on. Emma Carter had always believed that midnight was just another hour on the clock, until the night it stole everything she had left. The rain had already soaked through her faded blue sweatshirt by the time the apartment manager dragged her old suitcase onto the cracked concrete steps outside the building. The cheap wheels landed with a dull thud, wobbling before tipping onto one side. A single paper photo slipped from the half-open zipper and fluttered across the wet sidewalk before sticking against a storm drain. Emma hurried over, picked it up with trembling fingers, and carefully wiped away the rain. It was the last picture she still had of her parents, taken years before a highway accident had turned childhood into memory. She tucked it safely inside her wallet, zipped her suitcase shut, and looked back at the building that had been home for almost 3 years. Every window was dark. Nobody watched. Nobody asked if she had somewhere to go. The manager muttered a brief apology about unpaid rent, locked the front entrance and disappeared. Just like that, the world became frighteningly quiet except for the steady rhythm of rain hitting the empty street. Emma checked her phone. The battery had finally died after spending the afternoon searching for jobs that never called back. Her checking account held less than $12. Her closest friend had moved to another state months ago. Every nearby motel cost more than she could afford. She let out a slow breath that disappeared into the cold night air and pulled her suitcase behind her, unsure where her feet were leading. Downtown lights slowly faded behind rows of dark trees as she wandered farther than she had ever walked before. Cars became rare. Streetlights disappeared one by one until only the silver glow of the moon filtered through heavy clouds. The forest ahead looked almost unreal, wrapped in drifting fog that seemed to breathe with the wind. Emma hesitated at the weathered wooden sign standing beside the narrow road. The faded paint was barely readable. Northridge Forest. Someone had spray-painted another. Warning underneath years ago. Turn back before midnight. She almost laughed. It sounded like the kind of local ghost story people invented to entertain tourists. Yet before she could continue, the porch light of a lonely farmhouse flickered on across the road. An elderly woman stepped outside carrying a lantern. She spotted Emma standing in the rain and hurried toward the fence with surprising urgency. "Miss," she called through the storm, "don't take the North Trail tonight." Emma offered a tired smile. "I'm just looking for somewhere dry until morning." The woman's expression grew strangely pale. There are places in those woods that don't belong on any map. A gust of wind swallowed the rest of her words as the lantern flame danced wildly. Emma thanked her anyway, but another clap of thunder echoed overhead. There was nowhere else to go. Staying on the highway meant walking for another 8 miles before reaching the next town, and she doubted she could make it before sunrise. She adjusted her backpack, gripped the suitcase handle tighter, and stepped onto the narrow dirt trail leading into the forest. Almost immediately, the sounds of civilization disappeared behind her. Even the rain seemed quieter beneath the towering pines. Fog curled around ancient trunks like pale ribbons, hiding everything beyond a few yards. Her suitcase wheels struggled over roots and loose stones until finally one snapped clean off. Emma sighed, lifted the battered suitcase into her arms and kept walking. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Then through the shifting mist, she noticed something impossible. Far ahead, beyond rows of towering oaks, warm golden light glowed against the darkness. It wasn't a cabin. It wasn't a farmhouse. As she climbed one final hill, the fog slowly parted, revealing a magnificent stone castle rising above the forest as though it had been waiting there for centuries, untouched by time itself. Emma stood frozen, her heartbeat quickening. She had lived in this county her entire life. She was certain no castle had ever existed here before. Yet there it stood beneath the midnight sky, every window glowing softly, and somewhere deep inside, single bell echoed once, as if announcing that someone had finally arrived. Emma stood motionless at the edge of the clearing, her suitcase resting beside her feet as the impossible castle towered above the sea of drifting fog. Every stone wall reflected the pale moonlight with a quiet elegance that felt untouched by the modern world. Ivy climbed ancient towers without hiding their beauty, and hundreds of tall windows glowed with warm amber light, as though an entire family had gathered inside to escape the storm. Yet there were no parked cars, no security cameras, no paved driveway leading to the entrance. The only path was an old stone walkway stretching from the forest directly to enormous black oak doors decorated with silver carvings unlike anything Emma had ever seen. She looked back over her shoulder. The trail behind her had almost vanished beneath the fog. Even the forest seemed unwilling to show her the way back. A cold breeze brushed across her face, carrying the faint scent of cedar, rain, and something strangely sweet she could not identify. She wrapped her arms around herself and whispered, "Please let somebody be home." Her shoes splashed softly through shallow puddles as she walked toward the entrance. The castle somehow appeared even larger with every step, until the doors rose nearly 20 feet above her head. 2 stone statues guarded either side of the entrance. They resembled armored knights, but their faces were smooth and expressionless, their eyes fixed forever on the endless forest beyond. Emma swallowed nervously and reached for the heavy iron knocker shaped like a raven with outstretched wings. It felt surprisingly warm despite the cold rain. She hesitated for one heartbeat, then knocked 3 slow times. The sound echoed deep inside the castle. Once, twice, 3 times. Silence followed. She waited, listening to the rain drip from the roof onto polished stone. Maybe nobody lived here after all. Maybe this beautiful place was nothing more than an abandoned historical estate. She lowered her hand and turned slightly, considering whether she should continue walking through the night. Then she heard it. A distant series of footsteps, calm and measured, echoing through vast empty halls. Each step seemed impossibly clear, growing closer without ever becoming hurried. Emma felt her pulse quicken. Locks clicked one after another from somewhere inside the massive door. There were more locks than any ordinary house would ever need. A final metallic sound echoed through the entrance hall. The ancient doors slowly opened inward without a single creak. Warm golden light spilled into the darkness, wrapping around Emma like a blanket after hours in the freezing rain. She blinked against the sudden brightness. Marble floors stretched across an enormous entrance hall illuminated by towering chandeliers filled with candlelight instead of electric bulbs. Elegant staircases curved toward upper balconies lined with crimson banners bearing a silver crest she did not recognize. Everything inside looked perfectly maintained, untouched by dust or age. Standing in the center of the doorway was a man dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit. He appeared to be somewhere in his early 30s, tall and composed, with neatly combed dark hair and remarkably pale skin that almost seemed to glow beneath the warm lights. His silver-gray eyes rested quietly on Emma without surprise, without confusion, as though he had expected someone to arrive eventually. Neither of them spoke for several long seconds. Emma suddenly became aware of how soaked she looked, with rainwater dripping from her sleeves onto the polished stone beneath her boots. Embarrassment warmed her cheeks. "I am so sorry," she said softly. "I know it is late. My name is Emma. I got caught in the storm and I do not have anywhere else to go tonight. I only wanted to ask if there might be a porch or a barn where I could stay until morning. I promise I will leave before sunrise." The man's expression did not change, but something almost invisible flickered behind his calm eyes. Somewhere far beyond the entrance hall, a crystal glass slipped from unseen hands and shattered against marble. Then another. A hush spread through the castle so completely that even the rain outside seemed to disappear. Without taking his eyes off Emma, the man spoke in a calm, steady voice that carried effortlessly through the vast hall. "Come inside before you catch cold." Emma hesitated only for a moment before lifting her worn suitcase over the stone threshold. The enormous doors closed behind her with a deep, solid sound that echoed through the entrance hall, shutting out the rain, the wind, and the lonely world she had left behind. Warmth immediately spread through her chilled hands, and for the first time that night, she could breathe without shivering. She looked around in quiet amazement. Every polished marble tile reflected the golden candlelight above. Massive portraits of unfamiliar noble families lined the walls, each painted with extraordinary detail. Their eyes seemed almost alive, quietly watching every visitor who entered the castle. Fresh flowers filled crystal vases despite the storm outside, and somewhere beyond the grand staircase, soft piano music drifted through the silent corridors. Nothing about this place felt abandoned. Everything felt carefully preserved, almost frozen in another century. The mysterious host stepped aside, allowing Emma more room without making a single unnecessary movement. His calm presence somehow made the vast hall feel even quieter. Before Emma could thank him again, footsteps hurried down the curved staircase. Several elegantly dressed servants appeared, each stopping so suddenly that one nearly dropped the silver tray he carried. Their expressions shifted from routine professionalism to unmistakable disbelief the instant they noticed Emma standing inside the entrance hall. None of them spoke. Instead, every pair of eyes slowly turned toward the man beside her. Emma assumed they were simply surprised to see a stranger arriving so late. She offered an awkward smile and brushed a strand of wet brown hair behind her ear. "I promise I am not here to cause trouble," she said gently. "I only needed somewhere dry until morning." No one answered. One young servant lowered his head so quickly that Emma wondered if she had broken some house rule without realizing it. Another quietly stepped backward as though afraid to interrupt whatever invisible moment had just unfolded. The silence stretched, longer than comfort allowed. Then the man finally spoke. "You are our guest tonight." His voice remained steady and composed, carrying naturally through the enormous chamber without ever becoming loud. "Someone will prepare a room." Emma blinked in surprise. "You really do not mind?" she asked. "I cannot pay you, but I can help in the morning. I can clean, cook, wash dishes, anything you need." For the first time, something almost resembling amusement softened his otherwise unreadable expression. "We have enough people to handle those responsibilities." Emma laughed quietly, relieved that he seemed kinder than his serious appearance suggested. "Then at least let me say thank you. Most people would never open their front door after midnight." Before the man could respond, an elderly butler descended the staircase with remarkable composure. His silver hair was perfectly combed, and his dark suit looked as though it belonged to another era. He stopped beside the host and bowed respectfully before speaking in a voice barely above a whisper. "Your Majesty." Emma immediately looked around the hall, expecting another distinguished guest to appear. Nobody else entered. Confused, she looked back at the tall man standing beside her. The butler continued without lifting his head. "The council has already been informed that the gates opened." The man's silver eyes shifted briefly toward the butler before returning to Emma. "That will not be necessary tonight," he replied calmly. "Cancel every meeting until tomorrow evening." "As you command, Your Majesty." Emma frowned slightly. Surely she had misunderstood. Maybe this estate hosted historical events where everyone addressed the owner by ceremonial titles. It seemed unusual, but old families often had unusual traditions. She smiled politely, trying not to appear confused. "Your house is beautiful," she said. "It honestly feels like stepping into another world." The man studied her quietly, as though measuring every word she spoke. Somewhere above them, the great chandelier suddenly shimmered. For only the briefest instant, countless tiny reflections of golden light danced across the polished marble floor. Several servants lowered themselves onto one knee without being instructed, their expressions filled not with fear but with profound reverence. Emma stared in complete bewilderment. She had no idea what had just happened, but every instinct told her that she had unknowingly crossed far more than the entrance to an extraordinary castle. She had stepped across the invisible boundary separating the ordinary world from one that had remained hidden for centuries, and the man standing before her was not simply the owner of an ancient estate. He was the king every soul inside these walls had been waiting to protect. Emma followed the elderly butler across the vast entrance hall, still trying to understand why everyone treated the quiet man with such extraordinary respect. The polished marble beneath her damp shoes reflected endless rows of candlelight that never seemed to flicker despite the gentle draft drifting through the corridors. Every doorway revealed another breathtaking room filled with carved wood, towering bookshelves, antique clocks, and elegant paintings that appeared far older than the United States itself. It felt less like a home and more like a living museum hidden from the rest of the world. "This way, Miss Carter," the butler said politely. Emma blinked in surprise. "I do not remember telling anyone my last name." The old gentleman offered a small, mysterious smile. "Our staff tries to be attentive." Before she could ask another question, two housemaids approached carrying neatly folded towels and a dry wool blanket. Their uniforms were perfectly pressed, and every movement was graceful enough to resemble a carefully rehearsed performance. One of them held out the blanket with both hands. Please allow us to help you warm up. Emma accepted it with genuine gratitude. Thank you. You have all been incredibly kind. The young maid lowered her eyes instead of answering, as though speaking too freely might violate an ancient custom. That silence followed Emma everywhere she walked. Nobody whispered. Nobody hurried. Every servant seemed to know exactly where to stand before she even reached the next hallway. The entire castle moved with quiet precision, almost like a single heartbeat shared by hundreds of people. As they climbed the sweeping staircase, Emma noticed something else that made her slow down. Every grandfather clock they passed displayed exactly the same time. 12 o'clock. Not 1 minute later. Not 1 minute earlier. She glanced at another clock mounted above a fireplace. It also read midnight. Curious, she quietly checked the elegant pocket watch resting inside a glass display case. Midnight again. Excuse me, Emma asked, looking toward the butler. Are all the clocks broken? The elderly man paused for only the briefest moment before replying. They are exactly where they are meant to be. His answer explained nothing, yet he continued walking as though the conversation had ended. Emma frowned slightly but chose not to press further. Perhaps the clocks were part of some historical exhibit. Wealthy families often collected unusual antiques. They eventually reached a long gallery lined with enormous windows overlooking the forest. Emma instinctively walked closer to admire the view, but stopped almost immediately. She could clearly see the rain falling outside, yet not a single raindrop touched the glass. There were no streaks, no reflections. It was as though an invisible space separated the storm from the castle itself. She gently rested her fingertips against the window. The glass felt unexpectedly warm. How strange, she whispered. Somewhere farther down the corridor, a door opened. The same tall man stepped into the gallery with the calm confidence that seemed entirely natural to him. His black suit remained perfectly dry despite having greeted her at the entrance only minutes earlier. His silver-gray eyes met Emma's for a brief moment before shifting toward the endless forest beyond the windows. Has your room been prepared? He asked. I think so, Emma replied with a grateful smile. Everyone here has treated me far better than I deserve. He looked at her thoughtfully. Kindness does not have to be earned, Miss Carter. Those simple words lingered in the quiet air longer than Emma expected. Few people had spoken to her with such sincerity in years. Before she could thank him again, a faint vibration traveled through the stone floor beneath their feet. It lasted only a second. Then another followed, slightly stronger. Crystal chandeliers chimed softly throughout the hallway without anyone touching them. The servants immediately stopped where they stood. Every face turned toward the great entrance hall below. Emma noticed confusion spreading among them for the first time that night. The butler's calm expression became unusually serious. He slowly looked toward the king, waiting for instructions that had not yet been spoken. Then from somewhere deep beneath the castle, an ancient bell rang once. Its deep haunting tone echoed through every corridor, every staircase and every silent chamber. The king remained perfectly still, but his gaze lifted toward the distant ceiling as though listening to a voice no one else could hear. Emma had no way of knowing that the bell had remained silent for more than 600 years, and that it had awakened only because a human guest had crossed the castle's threshold. The echo of the ancient bell faded into a silence so complete that Emma could hear the soft crackle of distant fireplaces somewhere beyond the endless corridors. No one moved. The servants remained exactly where they stood, their expressions calm yet unmistakably alert. She glanced from one face to another, searching for an explanation, but nobody seemed willing to speak. Finally, the king broke the silence. Return to your duties, Lucian said in the same composed voice that never needed to rise above a conversation. Instantly the castle came alive again. Footsteps resumed. Doors opened quietly. Candles continued glowing as though nothing unusual had happened. Only the elderly butler lingered for a brief moment before offering a respectful bow and disappearing down another hallway. Emma released a breath she had not realized she had been holding. Does that bell mean something important? She asked carefully. Lucian regarded her for several seconds before answering. It has many meanings. Tonight is not the right time to explain them. His reply was polite, but it gently closed the subject. Emma nodded without pressing further. She had spent Enough years struggling through life to recognize when someone carried responsibilities too complicated to discuss with a stranger. I understand, she said quietly. Thank you again for letting me stay. Lucian inclined his head ever so slightly. You are welcome here tonight. Those simple words settled warmly in her heart. She followed one of the housemaids through another corridor lined with enormous paintings and polished marble columns, until they reached an elegant guest suite overlooking the forest. The room was larger than the entire apartment Emma had rented. A fire burned softly inside a carved stone fireplace. Fresh towels rested beside an old copper bathtub already filled with steaming water. A neatly folded cream-colored sweater and comfortable trousers had been placed on the bed alongside warm slippers that somehow appeared to be exactly her size. How did you know? Emma whispered before catching herself. The maid simply smiled. If you need anything, ring the bell beside the bed. She quietly closed the door behind her, leaving Emma alone for the first time since entering the castle. Emma slowly set her battered suitcase beside the wardrobe and looked around in disbelief. Everything felt impossibly peaceful. She removed her rain-soaked shoes and noticed how the warmth of the room gradually chased away the exhaustion that had settled into every muscle. As she unpacked the few belongings she still owned, her stomach reminded her that she had not eaten since late that afternoon. Almost on cue, someone knocked gently. A young servant entered carrying a silver tray filled with warm vegetable soup, fresh bread, butter, herbal tea, and slices of crisp apple. Dinner, Miss Carter. Emma smiled gratefully. This looks wonderful. Please tell everyone thank you. The servant hesitated for the briefest instant before placing the tray on the table. Emma noticed something curious. The servant had delivered food, yet he carried no plate for himself. Earlier she had seen dozens of staff moving throughout the castle, but not once had she noticed anyone actually eating. She dismissed the thought as unimportant and sat beside the window. Outside, the storm had begun to weaken. The forest remained hidden beneath rolling silver mist, while moonlight painted the ancient towers in pale blue light. It felt like a dream suspended somewhere between history and legend. After finishing the meal, Emma carefully folded the napkin and carried the tray toward the hallway so nobody would need to collect it later. As she rounded a nearby corner, she noticed an elderly groundskeeper kneeling beside a cracked stone pedestal decorated with faded symbols. One corner of the carved monument had broken loose, leaving several heavy fragments scattered across the polished floor. Without thinking, Emma set the tray aside and hurried over. Please let me help you, she said kindly. Before the old man could object, she reached down and gently lifted one weathered stone fragment back onto the pedestal. The instant her fingertips brushed the ancient carving, a faint golden light flowed through every engraved line like sunlight awakening beneath the stone. The soft glow spread outward in perfect circles, illuminating the corridor with warm radiance. Somewhere deep beneath the castle, another ancient bell answered with a single clear note, and far below the silent foundations, something that had slept for centuries quietly opened its eyes. Emma pulled her hand back in surprise as the golden light slowly faded into the ancient stone, leaving the carved symbols glowing faintly for only another heartbeat before returning to their weathered gray color. The elderly groundskeeper stared at the restored pedestal with wide eyes, his lips parting as though he wanted to speak but could not find the words. The broken crack that had divided the monument moments earlier had completely disappeared. It looked untouched by time. Emma blinked several times, convinced the strange light had been nothing more than a reflection from the chandeliers. I am sorry, she said nervously. Did I accidentally damage something? The old man slowly shook his head. No, Miss Carter. His voice carried an emotion she could not identify. Quite the opposite. Before Emma could ask what he meant, hurried footsteps echoed through the corridor. 3 elegantly dressed men entered, from opposite directions almost simultaneously, followed by several members of the castle's staff. Unlike the quiet servants she had met earlier, these newcomers carried themselves with unmistakable authority. Their tailored black coats were decorated with silver crests embroidered over the chest, and every pair of eyes fixed immediately upon the ancient pedestal. None of them looked at Emma first. They looked at the glowing carvings. One man with neatly combed white hair stepped forward, studying the monument in complete silence. His sharp gray eyes narrowed as he reached toward the stone without touching it. It awakened, he whispered. Another elder replied just as quietly, "That should not be possible." Emma shifted awkwardly, suddenly feeling as though she had walked into an important meeting by accident. "I really am sorry if I interrupted something," she offered politely. This time every head turned toward her. The oldest among them studied her carefully, his expression impossible to read. "You touched the guardian stone?" Emma nodded uncertainly. "It was broken. I only wanted to help him lift the piece back into place." A long silence followed. The elders exchanged thoughtful glances without speaking another word. Finally, the white-haired gentleman looked toward one of the attendants. "Inform His Majesty." The attendant bowed immediately before disappearing down the hallway with remarkable speed. Emma looked from one face to another. "Did I break another rule?" she asked quietly. The elderly groundskeeper answered before anyone else could. "No one has touched that monument for 6 centuries. Emma gave an embarrassed laugh. Well, it still looked pretty heavy. None of them smiled. Instead, they continued watching her with growing curiosity, as though every ordinary word she spoke somehow made the impossible event even more difficult to understand. Within moments, calm footsteps echoed from the far end of the corridor. Lucian approached without hurry, his composed expression revealing nothing despite the unusual gathering waiting for him. The elders respectfully stepped aside as he reached the restored monument. His silver-gray eyes settled briefly upon the flawless stone before turning toward Emma. "Tell me exactly what happened," he said. Emma explained everything honestly. She had noticed the elderly groundskeeper struggling with the broken stone, offered to help, and touched the carving without thinking. That was all. Lucian listened without interrupting. When she finished, he stepped closer to the monument and rested one hand lightly against the ancient surface. Nothing happened. The carvings remained dark. He withdrew his hand and looked back at Emma. "Would you touch it again?" Emma hesitated. "If you think it is safe." At his quiet nod, she gently placed her fingertips against the center of the carved symbol once more. Instantly, the entire monument awakened with warm golden light brighter than before. Fine lines of radiant energy spread across the engraved patterns like sunlight flowing beneath clear water. Soft chimes echoed somewhere deep inside the castle, followed by the unmistakable sound of another ancient bell answering from below the foundations. Every elder in the corridor fell completely silent. Lucian did not look at the glowing monument. He looked only at Emma, and for the first time since she had arrived at the castle, the calm certainty in his eyes gave way to genuine astonishment, because the impossible was no longer a rumor. It had just happened twice. The golden light slowly dissolved into the ancient stone, yet the silence that followed felt even heavier than the miracle itself. Emma lowered her hand and looked around the corridor with growing uncertainty. Every face watching her carried the same expression, quiet disbelief mixed with cautious respect. She shifted uncomfortably beneath their attention. "Did I do something wrong again?" she asked with an embarrassed smile. No one answered immediately. The oldest council member slowly stepped toward the monument and examined every carved line with careful precision. His fingertips hovered just above the stone without making contact. "The seal is completely restored," he murmured. Another elder shook his head almost imperceptibly. "It should have remained dormant forever." Emma looked from one speaker to the other. "I am afraid I do not understand what everyone is talking about." Lucian remained perfectly still beside the monument, his silver-gray eyes never leaving the ancient carvings. Finally, he turned toward the white-haired elder. "Bring me the chronicle." The elder hesitated. "Your Majesty, that record has not been opened in generations." Lucian answered calmly. "Tonight it will be." Within minutes, another attendant returned carrying an enormous leather-bound volume secured by silver clasps that had darkened with age. Dust did not cover the book. It looked as though someone had preserved it with extraordinary care for centuries. The attendant placed it gently upon a nearby oak table. The council members gathered around as Lucian slowly opened the heavy cover. Thick parchment pages revealed elegant handwriting unlike any Emma had ever seen. Strange symbols surrounded beautifully illustrated maps, celestial charts, and portraits of kings wearing crowns identical to the crest she had noticed throughout the castle. Emma remained respectfully where she stood, assuming the book contained private family history. Then Lucian stopped turning pages. His eyes rested upon a full-page illustration drawn in faded gold ink. Without speaking, he turned the book toward the council. Every elder leaned closer. One quietly inhaled. Another closed his eyes as though remembering a distant story told long ago. Emma could not see the page from where she stood. Curiosity finally overcame her hesitation. "May I ask what it says?" Lucian looked at her for several thoughtful seconds before gently rotating the book so she could see it as well. The illustration showed a towering castle surrounded by mist beneath a full moon. At its entrance stood a single young woman wearing simple clothes rather than royal garments. The artist had drawn her reaching toward the great doors while light surrounded the ancient walls. Above the painting, elegant letters formed an inscription that Emma could not read. One of the elders quietly translated, "When the forgotten door chooses its guest, the sleeping stone shall remember the first promise." Emma studied the illustration with growing confusion. "She looks ordinary." The elder smiled faintly. "That is precisely the point." Lucian continued reading several more lines in the ancient language before speaking softly. "According to this record, the castle itself recognizes those whom fate has already chosen." Emma blinked. "Chosen for what?" No one answered immediately. Instead, Lucian closed the massive chronicle and rested one hand upon its worn cover. "There is another passage," he said quietly. "One that has never fully made sense until now." He looked directly at Emma. "It says that no traveler finds this castle by accident. The path only appears to the one the gates have already accepted." Emma felt her heartbeat quicken. She remembered the old woman beside the forest warning her not to enter the northern trail. She remembered the fog swallowing the road behind her. Most of all, she remembered believing she had stumbled upon the castle by pure chance. "You mean?" she whispered. Lucian gave the slightest nod. "You did not discover this place tonight, Miss Carter." His calm voice echoed gently through the silent corridor. "This place found you first." Emma remained silent long after Lucian's words settled into the quiet corridor. She wanted to dismiss everything as an elaborate misunderstanding, yet every strange moment since entering the forest fit together too perfectly. The hidden trail. The castle that should not have existed. The doors opening without hesitation. The ancient monument awakening beneath her fingertips. None of it felt like coincidence anymore. She looked toward the towering windows where the last drops of rain traced gentle lines through the moonlight. "I was only looking for shelter," she said softly. "I was never searching for any of this." Lucian's expression remained calm, but there was a quiet understanding in his silver-gray eyes. Most important journeys begin that way. Before Emma could answer, the great doors at the far end of the corridor opened with measured precision. More council members entered, their elegant black coats trimmed with silver embroidery that matched the ancient crests throughout the castle. Unlike the servants, they did not look surprised. They looked concerned. The eldest among them stepped forward and bowed respectfully toward Lucian. "Your Majesty, representatives from the northern, eastern, and western houses have arrived. They request an immediate audience regarding tonight's events." Lucian did not appear surprised. "I expected them." The elder lowered his voice. "Some believe the prophecy should remain undisturbed. Others fear that the awakening of the guardian stone will change the balance among the houses." Emma immediately took a small step backward. "If this is because of me, I can leave," she said sincerely. "I never wanted to cause problems for anyone." Every conversation stopped. Lucian slowly turned toward her. "Leave." Emma nodded. "You have already shown me more kindness than I ever expected from strangers. I do not want your family or your people arguing because I happened to walk through the wrong forest." For the first time, several council members exchanged uneasy glances. Lucian answered with complete certainty. "You did not create this situation." He paused before adding, "And you are not leaving tonight." Emma searched his face, expecting to hear obligation or duty in his voice. Instead, she found quiet conviction. One council member cautiously stepped forward. "Your Majesty, with respect, every noble house will demand an explanation by sunrise. Rumors are already spreading throughout the kingdom." Lucian met the elder's eyes without hesitation. "Then they shall receive one." His calm voice carried through the corridor with unmistakable authority. "Miss Emma Carter entered this castle under my protection. That protection begins now and will remain until I decide otherwise." Absolute silence followed. Even Emma felt the weight of those words without fully understanding their importance. The elderly butler lowered his head respectfully. Several servants instinctively placed one hand over their hearts. The council members remained still, recognizing that the declaration had not been a suggestion but a royal decree. Emma looked at Lucian with genuine surprise. "You hardly know me." A faint smile, almost impossible to notice, touched the corner of his expression. Kindness reveals more about a person than years of introductions. Those words warmed Emma far more deeply than the fire waiting inside her guest room ever could. She lowered her eyes for a moment, humbled by the trust of someone she had only met hours earlier. Beyond the windows, the clouds slowly drifted apart, allowing bright moonlight to pour across the ancient courtyard. At the very center of the castle grounds stood a circular fountain that had remained dry for generations. Without warning, clear water began rising from its silent basin, shimmering beneath the moon as though awakened from a centuries-long sleep. One young servant gasped softly. The elderly butler closed his eyes in quiet disbelief. Lucian looked toward the fountain, then back at Emma. He said nothing, yet deep within the castle another ancient mystery had begun unfolding, and somewhere beneath the old stone foundations, a sealed chamber patiently waited for the one visitor it had been expecting all along. Emma did not realize how exhausted she truly was until she returned to the guest room. The fire still glowed gently inside the stone fireplace, filling the room with a quiet warmth that felt almost unreal after the cold streets she had walked only hours earlier. She placed her worn suitcase beside the bed and stood by the window for a long moment, watching silver moonlight spread across the castle grounds. The fountain that had mysteriously awakened continued flowing with crystal-clear water, its gentle sound carrying through the peaceful night. Everything outside appeared calm again, yet Emma could not shake the feeling that the castle itself had changed since her arrival. She quietly changed into the clothes the servants had prepared and sat at the edge of the bed, trying to make sense of everything she had witnessed. Every logical explanation seemed to disappear the moment she remembered the glowing stone, the ancient chronicle, and Lucian's quiet promise that she would remain under his protection. She had arrived believing she was simply another homeless waitress searching for shelter. Now she found herself surrounded by mysteries older than history itself. Eventually fatigue overcame curiosity. Emma lay back against the soft pillows and closed her eyes. The castle was so silent that she could hear the faint ticking of a single clock somewhere beyond the walls. Unlike every other clock she had seen that night, this one seemed to move normally. Tick, tick, tick. She drifted into a light sleep until something gently pulled her awake. At first she thought it was another dream. Then she heard it again. A quiet voice, barely louder than a whisper. It was not coming from outside her window. It was coming from somewhere beneath the floor. Emma slowly sat upright. The room remained empty. The fireplace burned peacefully. Moonlight still covered the balcony beyond the curtains. Yet the whisper returned, soft enough to disappear if she breathed too loudly. She slipped on her slippers, opened the bedroom door, and stepped into the empty corridor. No servants were nearby. No footsteps echoed through the halls. The whisper came again, strangely familiar despite belonging to someone she had never met. It seemed to call her name with remarkable patience, never demanding, only waiting. Emma followed the sound through winding corridors illuminated by rows of candles that somehow brightened as she approached. She descended one staircase, then another, each leading deeper beneath the castle. The elegant marble gradually gave way to ancient stone polished smooth by countless generations. Finally she reached a narrow hallway ending at an enormous circular door made from dark metal unlike anything she had ever seen. Strange symbols covered its surface, surrounding a single silver keyhole that had long since gathered the color of age. The whisper stopped the moment Emma stepped in front of the door. Complete silence settled around her. She should have turned back. Every sensible instinct told her to find a servant and ask for help. Instead she slowly reached out, almost without thinking, and rested her fingertips against the cold metal. The ancient symbols awakened immediately beneath her hand, glowing with the same warm golden light she had seen upon the guardian stone. A gentle vibration spread through the massive door. Somewhere far above, distant bells answered one another across the castle. Emma. quickly stepped backward in surprise as the heavy lock turned by itself with a deep metallic click. The enormous door slowly opened only a few inches before stopping, revealing nothing beyond except soft golden light spilling through the narrow opening. Then a calm voice unlike any she had ever heard drifted from the hidden chamber. "Welcome home. The last heir has finally returned." Emma stood frozen, her heart racing as the mysterious light continued shining into the silent hallway, and far above in the highest tower, Lucian slowly lifted his eyes toward the sleeping castle because he knew the oldest secret of his kingdom had just awakened at last.